Hello, everybody, and welcome to part three of my video series. Thanks for comments on Messenger and email and so on. And it appears some of the comments are about my beard and my choice of shirts. Or here's a different shirt for you. In seriousness, today I'm going to look a little bit about how solution focus has been evolving or developing. But before that, I also need to kind of establish some, I suppose, understand what is and what isn't solution focused work. And I do, unusually for me, have a few notes, and that's just to help me with some keywords. So let's start with what is solution focus? What is solution focused therapy? What is solution focused practice, and so on. I'm not going to get into very minute definitions. It has to have this element or it has to have that element, and if it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. But I'll refer to the conversations that myself and three colleagues had earlier, which again I've alluded to. And one of my colleagues said that when you open a stable and you see horses in the stable, you see chestnut horses and white horses and black horses, but you recognize they're all horses. And that's a bit like that with solution focused work. It's relatively easy, I think, to recognize what is solution focus and what solution focus isn't. And there's a whole load of questions and techniques around solution focus, and there's a solution focus mindset discussion or not. But inevitably, if we're looking at solution focus and we boil it down to somebody's description of their preferred future, how far they are on the way to that future, and questions based on their last answer related to that preferred future, that'll do for now. And I won't get into more kind of minutiae than that. So SF has been around for a long time. It's been around for nearly 40 years. And in that time, it's only natural that there'll be some developments and some changes. And I'm going to look at kind of not necessarily the specific developments and changes, but I'm going to look at things in kind of different aspects. So we can look at adaptation, we can look at evolution, we can look at development and refinement, and we can look at what I would see as breakaways from solution focus. That point where you no longer recognise it as solution focus. So if we think about how solution focus may have developed, which it has, we have to have this clarity to start with about what is and what isn't solution focus. And I maybe haven't given enough clarity on that, but that's okay. We can come back to that, especially if you leave comments and ask questions. And I'm always willing to answer those questions or to develop something in the next session. So let's start with the topic of adaptation. There is no doubt that solution focus in its particular therapy form doesn't always suit in all situations. So to give you a couple of examples, working in schools with very young people, people may have adapted some of the solution focused words to make them pictures, to make them games, and that's perfectly fine. The essence of solution focus is still there. And actually, before I talk about the essence of solution focus, I'll talk about what I mean by that. If we took the analogy of the horses that I spoke about earlier, let's take another analogy. So I don't mind a single malt whiskey. I quite like a single malt whiskey every now and then. Now, if I add water to that, I've diluted it, but it still tastes of whiskey. It's still a single malt whiskey. I can still recognise that. If I add Coke to it, what I've actually done is transformed it into whiskey that tastes of whiskey and Coke. I'll come back to that and I'll explain why later. So, adaptation. We adapt the solution focused approach in a different setting. And if you look at the definition of adaptation, it says a process of change where something is better suited to its environment. And I'll give you an example of that here. I live and work in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I work with a lot of Māori people. In the Māori world, it's very, very important to develop relationships at the start of something. They call it whanangatanga. And in whanangatanga, you would talk about people's background, where they come from, their whakapapa, who they know, and various other things. Without doing those things, it's almost impossible to develop a good relationship. I say that because when we adapt a solution focused approach to working with Mari, we would spend a lot more time doing those kind of problem free talk, doing a whanangatanga. So adaptation is changing something to the context. Evolution is a gradual development of something, and a good example of that is best hopes. So best hopes never started as best hopes. The best hopes question didn't start like that. It started, as miracle question and so on and so forth. But best hopes has evolved out of a miracle question. It's evolved out of a preferred future. Um, and best hopes question itself has evolved to become now best hopes from our time together and so on. And there's good reasons for that. A development is a new stage in a changing situation. So a good example of that might be exceptions, which I still use. I still use exceptions, but certainly there's been some discussion of not using the word exceptions, but looking at instances of a change already happening. That's a development, without a doubt, it's a development, but it's still solution focused. It's still the same idea, the idea of somebody's preferred future, but rather than looking at the differences when it's not happening, looking at the times when it is happening. Refinement. Refinement is when we remove unwanted elements or we make minor changes, we improve clarity. A good example of that would be the almost disappearance of between session tasks, homework tasks. They seem to be unnecessary, they seem to be a little bit expert led, and they've more or less gone by the wayside. So that would be a refinement. So far, we've looked at adaptation, evolution, development, and refinement. And then there's breakaways. Okay, the breakaways, as I call them, are the bits where you open a stable door or you look at a glass of whiskey and you say, "Yeah, it's got some solution focused elements, but it's not really solution focused." So, what makes it not solution focused? Interesting question. Who am I to say what makes it not solution focused? So myself and our three colleagues that we discussed, we looked at our kind of all our backgrounds, all our experience, and between us we had a considerable amount of experience. And we kind of felt that there were a couple of things that told us it was not solution focused, but made us recognize when things were no longer solution focused. One of those is when questions are asked that are introduced by the therapist but don't necessarily relate to the last answer of the person we're seeing. So they're introduced agendas by the therapist, by the professional. Alongside that, when the agenda is set by the therapist or the professional. So this is what we're going to talk about. This is what I think you need to do. This is what I think is happening. That's very expert led, and we wouldn't see that as solution focused at all. Um, where where solution focus is combined with another therapy to make something new. I've seen cognitive systemic solution focused therapy. It's not solution focused. It has elements of, but it isn't. Okay, you can put some wheels on a on a box, but it's still wheels on a box. It's not a car. Okay, and so those are some of the things where we don't recognise that. But alongside that, the important thing to remember is who decides what is solution focused and who decides what isn't solution focused. And we come back to the lens I talked about in the second session. The lens that I look to this through, which is that of a white, middle-aged, I guess, middle-class man, and recognizing my place in terms of the fact that regardless of disadvantages I may or may not have had, I still recognize the privilege and the position I'm in. And that's important. So when I look at where developments evolve, I think about associations or books. And when I look at associations websites, I look at who's on those websites. I look how many women are on those websites, how many people of color are on those sites. When I look at books, I look at the references and I see who's been referenced. And generally, not always, but generally, you can probably put it down to around about 20, 25 people are all often cross-referenced in solution-focused books. And I'll leave it for you to have a look at those and decide how many of those are white and how many of those are women. Regardless of which, What happens is any development, any evolution, any um, particular change in the status quo of solution focus needs to have a platform. That platform is where people will hear about it, just as I'm doing here now, exactly as I'm doing here now. Um, that platform will be looked at by people that find an interest in it. That platform will be looked at about by where it is promoted. That platform will be looked at and listened to by those that promote it, that have a voice and a say in the community. And by the community, I mean the solution focused world. So the solution focused world grew, and it grew to a point where we are now, where people can make some pretty clear um, claims for their place in that world. I guess my question is, and my assertion is, are those the people that take this model forward? I'm more interested, for instance, in what are the developments in a small place in South America or India or China, these places where they don't necessarily hold to the same group preferences, the same associations, the same rules as those set by the establishment. And heresy and misconduct is very much about challenging the establishment. And I'm not challenging for the sake of challenging, I'm not challenging because I'm right. What I'm saying is it's time we look at those things. Okay, it's very interesting when I look at keynote speakers. I'm always interested. Who are they? What are they saying? Are they saying the same thing to the same people, promoted by the same people for the same people? Um, Diversity, inclusion, new ideas need to sometimes come bottom up, not top down. And particularly if a top down is becoming an establishment. I'm going to leave it there because I said there'd be 10-minute 10-minute meetings videos, and I've gone past 12 minutes. Um, Please give me your thoughts back. What I intend to do next time is actually look at some of the involvements, look at some of the developments, and examine them in a little bit more detail. Okay, so are they really developments? Are they really evolvements? Are they um, semantics? Are they there for a reason to improve the end beneficiary's experience, or they're there just to make a headline? Um, Keep watching, and please feel free to critique me. I'm certainly not the overall authority on this. I'm just asking questions and proposing some ideas. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.